I'm not a scientist. This room is full of sort of eminent scientists. So I was thinking, okay, I've got to give a talk. So what am I going to do? So in thinking about the talk, I dusted off an old box of press clippings. And I actually thought, I'm going to let the box tell the story. So let's go back to summer, well, Northern Hemisphere summer, 18th July 1998, The Guardian. So by now, GMOs are a big live debate in the UK, and Monsanto is running a public relations campaign and under the labelling Food, Health and Hope. And there is one of Monsanto's GM potatoes. These were appearing across the UK media. GeneWatch was active. One of Monsanto's themes was we're going to feed the world, and GeneWatch, as one of the NGOs, was pushing back saying, actually, can GM feed the world? The issue of GM crops being grown in the UK was growing, and as GM trials were happening across the UK, so activists were beginning to target them. Ooh.
Yeah, it's back. I don't know what happened.
Don't move.
No,
Okay.
Just continue.
Yeah, just continue. So we're now 31st of July, 1998. So Devon was one of the hot spots near Dartington, was one of the GM trial spots. And this is the Western Morning News. Security guards are now guarding GM crop trials. That lot of crops gets destroyed by activists, and there is a trial. So that's the 5th of August. So you can feel tension is building in August that year. There's a picture of very younger me sitting next to Anthony Steen, MP for Totnes at the time. This was a meeting in Totnes, attended by hundreds of people. Public concern was huge on GM at that moment. And because of the testing at Dartington, a lot of people were worried. Steen became famous for saying that on the expenses scandal, people were jealous of his large house, and that's the only reason people got pissed off with him. So we're now the 10th of August. Okay, so public concern, GM crop trials. So that's the background to Árpád appearing on World in Action. And, you've already been shown what he said. This is most of what he said. But basically, it was 150 seconds he spoke for that changed his life. Okay? And I don't think anyone probably would have assumed or predicted what was going to happen for him speaking out. And I won't read it out, but that's all. He did actually say, I actually believe this technology can be made to work for us. But he also said it's very unfair to use our fellow citizens as guinea pigs. So he was a concerned scientist speaking out. So we're now the 10th of August. 3 days later, after the programme, he's congratulated by his boss, but 3 days later, he's suspended. The issue keeps bubbling along. The Ecologist magazine, I don't know if anyone knows it, they run a whole issue on Monsanto, called the Monsanto Files. The whole edition was on GM. A certain person writes an article for it, expressing his concerns about GM. By December that year, this is the Observer, Europe to lose the gene harvest. So such was public concern by now that GM's, is in real trouble across the continent. So, as Vivian has told you, a group of scientists came together to express their concerns about the way that Árpád had been treated. I haven't gone into what happened with the Rowell and, the way, So we started working at The Guardian on sort of exposing what these scientists were saying. So on the 12th of February 1999, The Guardian runs a front-page story, food scandal exposed. International scientists back shock findings of suppressed research into modified food. So front-page news, 2 full pages inside the paper. And an editorial with The Guardian calling for a moratorium. And I don't think we then predicted what was going to happen in the press in the following few days. And this is just a sort of snapshot of what happens in the next few days in the UK after this. 13th, so this is the day after, the Express. Front page news, shops in fear over GM food. Writes a leader, we must give a lead over GM foods. The Express, this scientist revealed the perils of GM food, now he's been gagged for life. Same day, so day after, the Guardian letters page, feeding frenzy over GM, is completely dominating the letters pages in the paper. George Monbiot writes, stop the crops. And he says, the geneticist Árpád Pusztai is a dangerous man. He's released into the environment a virulent, self-replicating organism which is already running riot across Britain. It's called the truth. We'll come back to Monbiot in a minute. 14th, so we're now 2 days after. So Observer, shop warnings are ordered on gene foods. Still front page news. By now it's genetic food storm. Public won't swallow it. Just as the Observer dived in, the Independent on Sunday were now also running a GM foods campaign, the seeds of destruction. Monsanto's claim that GM crops will end third world hunger is spurious. It's also dominating the Independent on Sunday's letters page. So, 3 days after, back on the front page of The Guardian, GM food rev splits Labour. 16th of February, great, I worked on this story. So there was a tip-off that one of the key genes, Lord Sainsbury, who's then the science minister, he had an interest in the key gene patent. So front page story, again, Guardian. Daily Mail now jumps in 2 days later. GM foods, how Blair ignored our top scientists. Guardian, back again. Meacher puts GM crops on hold. 21st, now we go to the Sunday Times. The mad forces of genetic darkness. Now we're also in the Financial Times, so it's going across the press. Leader editorial, genetic seeds of discord. 1st of March, Financial Times again, talking about how Monsanto had been criticised over its modified food claims. Surprise, surprise. Going back to the adverts I showed you at the beginning. Letter in the Financial Times, US threatens trade sanctions. Remember this. Ninth of March, again, Financial Times, concern widespread over bioengineering. Eighteenth of March, supermarkets and move on modified food. 19th of March, we're gagging on GM. Monsanto must face up to its meltdown, by John Vidal, who was the environment editor at the time. Daily Mail, is your lifestyle making you a GM junkie? It's 2 pages of their weekend magazine. Nothing like a good tabloid headline. 9th of June, Northern Foods halts GM use. This is now serious. You know, companies are stopping trials, stopping use. But it's still dominating the front pages of every newspaper in the country. 20th of June, GM food threatens the planet, Observer. So, some reflections. The Pusztai GM scandal, it was, as I said, it's generating numerous front-page stories and scandals. It was one of the dominant political and scientific news stories in 1999. And the issue exploded for weeks in the media and rumbled on for about 6 months. And it was across the media. It was, you know, from the FT to the tabloids. And crucially, a scientific issue had become a political issue. It had been taken out of the cosy club of scientific correspondence, and political, journalists were writing about it. And just sort of a reflection for you on the sort of, it also had become subject matter for the political cartoonists. Austin, on The Guardian, was having a field day. I love the one on the left. It still makes me laugh. Yeah. It wasn't just Austin, though. There were others. So genetically modified their float. Blair looking at banana skins. And one in the Observer, which is quite funny. But it just shows you how, you know, if the political cartoonists are are sort of making fun of GM, just how embedded the story had become in the psyche of the time of the UK. It rumbled on, you know. I'm just going to flick through a few years now. So November 98, red pepper. GM can't eat, won't eat, how to feed the world without genetic meddling. People who've been ripping up crops were now on trial. So I was still writing about it. This is a piece in the Big Issue, November 99. Also that month, we've just been hearing about it earlier, how the Royal Society threatens the editor of the Lancet, Richard Horton. I remember sitting in a pub with Richard Horton. There he was with his pint and his leather jacket, recounting the story of how he'd been threatened by this guy. And he was so outraged, he was prepared to go public, even though he basically threatened his career by doing it. And then, of course, he went on to publish the research. July 2000, big issue again, you know, can we trust GM-free food? October 2000, secret GM trials. Again, it's back on the front page of a national newspaper. And here's a piece by me talking about how, you know, anti-GM scientists are facing widespread assaults on their credibility. And there's a picture of a younger member of the audience there. So he hasn't aged a bit, I don't think. So, and then yes, so I tried to put a lot of this into a book called Don't Worry, It's Safe to Eat. That was published in 2003, and then we, on the back of that, I did the Mail piece, and I tried to find an original copy of this, but I couldn't. So, yes. So this was the piece where we're talking about what happened in those 3 crucial days between Árpád being congratulated and then being fired. And there were 2 witnesses who were, you know, or 2 people corroborating Árpád's story that basically a phone call had happened. And this was political pressure put on the riot coming from America. And that's why I say remember that story, that America was all already threatening its partners over GM. We tried to FOIA to get the phone records off the riot, put freedom of information requests in, but it was difficult. I think we got partial release of records. So, and I think there's still an appetite to try and finally get to the bottom of this, even now. So, watch this space on that. So that's 2003. Let's just jump a decade and sort of where are we now? So we're, suddenly we get a new pro-GM group formed with Mark Linus, Owen Patterson and Matt Ridley. Ecomodernism has sort of sprung up in the UK. Linus, they launched an event which Linus wrote a piece in The Guardian saying was a screw-up of impressive proportions, which I think is one of the few times he's being honest. But anyway, so 2019, Boris, never one to miss an opportunity. Here he is speaking at, I think it's the Manchester Science Museum. And he says, I can imagine in the future of this wonderful museum, there'll be exhibits recording not only the breakthroughs in bioscience in here in Manchester and elsewhere that allows the UK to lead the world in producing genetically modified crops, blight-resistant potatoes that will feed the world. So we're back again on potatoes, GM potatoes, going to feed the world. It's the same rhetoric that Monsanto was using back in '98, except this is now 20 years later. So, May 22, European Commission launches a new consultation on GMOs. With Friends of the Earth saying that, the debate on the deregulation of new GMOs is a flagrant attempt to divert time, money and attention away from truly sustainable and already proven solutions like agroecology. Our message to the Commission is clear: stop pushing for the deregulation of new GMOs and keep them strictly labelled and safety checked. October 22, Mark Linus tries again, this time with something called Replanet. So it's another pro-GM sort of like organisation. November last year, ironically, Monvio teams up with Replanet to reboot food. And as GM Watch say, the new campaign allies strange bedfoes in support of anti-organic, pro-GM and pro-synthetic food. And that just is the clip to the right from his article the day after we did the original thing, saying George Monvio was the first British journalist to draw attention to the hazards of genetic engineering in the national press. So I don't know what's going on with George, but yeah. February this year. So we don't have GM anymore. We have genetic technology. We have precision technology. And as GM Watch pointed out, so this bill was just about to happen. According to Science Minister George Freeman, the UK will soon become a global testbed for agitech, gene-edited crops and synthetic biology, among other technologies. And then in March this year, it passed and got royal assent from the person who'd written an article in Monsanto, in the Ecologist all those years ago, warning about genetic engineering, King Charles. And as GM Free says, this bill setting up mechanisms that will impose untested and unlabelled GMOs on the entire UK food chain. Some people are still speaking out, and as Vandana Shiva said, no matter what it's called, the precision this, gene tweaking, whatever, the renewed push for GM organisms arguing that much of the gene editing process is dangerously unpredictable and calls it ignorance to think that climate-adapted crops can only come from industrial labs. That was last month. And at least in Brussels, there is more of a debate that's going on here. And this was just a few days ago. Corporate Europe Observatory have worked with 340 organisations signing a joint letter to protect the right to choose of what we produce and what we eat, arguing that new GMOs must remain risk-assessed, traceable, and clearly labelled. So my closing thoughts for you are 25 years ago, the world was extremely worried about GM, but now in the UK, there's basically no media interest. There's very little public scientific debate. There's little public awareness. And ironically, even some who were originally opposed are now for it. I work across many controversial industries, and the GM industry is just like nukes or oil, and it will play a long game, and it will rely on public inertia or ignorance to get what it wants. But much remains unknown of dangers and safety, and also the corporate control of some of the new technologies that people are talking about. And let's go back to Árpád, when he said, I find it very, very unfair to use our fellow citizens as guinea pigs. So let's not be those guinea pigs. R.I.P. Árpád. Thank you.